As the episode begins, Twilight is already in full obsessive mode, triple-checking checklists to make other checklists, and by the time she gets anything done, Spike already has a cramp from all the writing and checking he's had to do. Alright, Twilight, I think it's time to join Organizers Anonymous. This isn't just affecting you anymore, it's hurting others now too. Poor Spike is gonna get carpal tunnel syndrome before he's even old enough to, discover the other benefits of having hands. Hey, I'm just saying, if you're gonna get a cramp in your hand, you might as well make it worthwhile. But it turns out that after all her planning, Twilight lost track of her most important assignment. Have you ever had that moment when you were in school and a really important deadline snuck up on you and you suddenly realized that you had nothing to show for it? The kind of assignment that made the difference between whether you pass or fail in the first place, and with no idea where to even begin, you're scrambling at the last minute to have something, anything to hand in? I'd like to think everyone's gone through that at one point, and for Twilight, that moment is now. Between all of her list making, picnic planning, chainsaw polishing, and cheerleading practice, the entire week has gone by and she hasn't learned anything new about friendship. And yeah, that's kind of a big deal when you remember that it's the main reason she's here in the first place. Considering how high profile her teacher is, she imagines the worst possible consequence for failure, being sent back to kindergarten. Of course, Celestia has never actually made such a threat, but the way this is presented makes you wonder if Twilight's just embarrassed at the thought of being in kindergarten as a young adult, or if some horrible event happened there that traumatized her as a child. Still, without freaking out too much, she takes the most reasonable step and goes around to each of her friends to see if anyone has a problem they need help with. But when it turns out there's not a single problem in the whole town, that's when she really starts panicking. Thankfully, Spike snaps her back to reality long enough for her to take the next most reasonable step. She goes back to her friends, explains what the problem is, and asks for their help. And their response is to laugh at her and tell her it's not important. Oh, well, fuck you too. Fluttershy even says that she's never seen Twilight that upset before. She is one of your best friends. I mean, even if she is overreacting, you could at least keep an eye on her to make sure she's okay. But nah, that would cut into your lounging around time. Feeling like there's nowhere else to turn, Twilight decides that if there aren't any problems to be solved, she'll create one herself. But as much as this sounds like a bad idea, and it is a really bad idea, things still haven't spun completely out of control yet. Her first plan is simply to give her childhood doll to the Cutie Mark Crusaders and then give them some routine lecture about sharing. But when it turns out they don't want the doll, Twilight enchants it so that anyone who looks at it will feel a strong need to have it. And as is often the case when Twilight uses magic out of desperation, the spell ends up being too powerful, and soon half the town erupts into an all-out brawl. Thankfully, Princess Celestia shows up to set things right, though she doesn't look too happy with her student, and Twilight's friends finally figure out that, gosh, something might be wrong. In private, though, Celestia takes on a much more caring and understanding tone as she tells Twilight that there never was any set deadline for turning in her friendship reports. This actually goes back to the first episode as part of the reason Celestia told Twilight to make friends without spelling out for her that friendship was required to stop Nightmare Moon is because true friendship isn't something you can manufacture. It happens organically in its own time, and the same is true for Twilight's lessons. The other main five show up in Twilight's defense, saying it was their fault for not taking her more seriously earlier. Celestia agrees not to punish Twilight, but in return, her friends must now also report when they learn something about friendship. This will set the format of the show for the rest of the season, as it now allows for more focus on the other characters besides Twilight. But it's also an important lesson in its own right. It shows that just because you have better social skills than others, that doesn't mean you can't still learn something about being a better friend. And even when the focus is on Twilight dealing with a problem, how her friends react to it can be just as important. When they talk about taking the smaller stuff seriously, obviously that doesn't mean they have to indulge all of Twilight's crazier ideas, but you have to at least take it seriously enough to keep things in check. When a close friend is clearly upset and comes begging for help, the appropriate response is not laughing in her face. Yes, Pinky, you should feel ashamed for that. And in the end, they all sit down to write their first letter to the princess, repeating everything that they just told her in person. Overall, this is a very solid episode that's not without its flaws. Aside from the final scene that really only exists to fill out the runtime, I have some very mixed feelings about the lesson. While I think that putting more responsibility on Twilight's friends is ultimately a good thing for all of them, the episode still doesn't address Twilight's original problem. She is overreacting and freaking out over nothing, and while her friends should have stuck with her to keep her from making an ass out of herself, her obsessive behavior really is something that she needs to to get under control. Supposedly, she'll learn that lesson in It's About Time, but at the time of this review, we really don't know yet, so we'll have to wait and see what happens in Season 3. Also, the lesson has a problem in terms of how much of it is applicable to the audience, because again, this isn't about Twilight learning anything, it's just saying that her friend should have tried harder to be there for her. Now, in real life, you can only control yourself. You can't control anyone else's actions, so if you find yourself in this situation and you're in, say, Pinkie Pie's position, hopefully you'll learn to be more considerate towards your friend in need. But if you're in Twilight's position and you really need your friend's help, the best you can do is hope that they all learn the same lesson, and if not, you're kinda screwed. Now, realistically, that isn't the episode's fault, but it is still worth thinking about. Ultimately, though, the episode's strengths far outweigh its weaknesses. The format of the show is slightly shaken up in a way that's very welcome. We get a closer look at the relationship between Twilight and Celestia. In one scene that's practically tossed out as a joke, we get what is to this day the most significant bit of character development for Big Macintosh, and in spite of its potential shortcomings, the lesson of empathizing with your friends and realizing that a small issue for you might be a serious problem for them is still hugely important. And maybe if you gave them just a little bit of help, then they could also realize that it wasn't a big deal, and that's something that a lot of people unfortunately seem to forget. Again, the presentation's a little flawed, but I still consider it to be a big plus, and for that, Lesson 0 gets a 9 out of 10.